welcome to episode 203 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast. We are recording on April 30th, 2023. My name is Jeff. I'm the host of the show for tonight. I'm based in Central Ontario. I'm a target shooter, ham radio operator, general overall handyman, and weather nerd.
And I'm Brad. I'm in Eastern Ontario, part-time prepper, constantly trying to better myself.
My name's Jerry. I'm a tactical beard owner, a t-shirt guru, government critique, and the reason we hit the explicit button most times.
I'm the Frugal Gunny, recently moved to Northern Ontario, right in the middle of nowhere. I'm an off-gridder, shooter, hunter, fisher, gatherer, trapper type, and a generalist all around. Only recently came to accept that I'm a prepper.
Nice. If you want to support the show and help keep the Canadian Prepper Podcast on the air, you can buy some swag. We have both the Canadian Prepper Podcast t-shirt that Jeff has on tonight and a tactical Velcro patch at www.prepperpodcast.ca. All proceeds help keep the lights on and the backup generator fueled.
Now, if you're enjoying the show, please take a couple of minutes and like us on Facebook and submit a review on iTunes. Also, we'd love to hear from you and get your feedback, whether it's good or bad, or even if it's just a topic you'd like us to cover. You can email us at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca.
So we've got some middle of nowhere content for you this episode. So we'll start off with some recent news, update our personal preps, and then we'll get into the main topic. We're going to do Off-Grid 2.0.
Yay! something a lot of people aspire to, I guess. Is Gunny is being the front runner for this, I guess, to get off grid and get out there and be independent. But we're still waiting. So my news is that the world is still doing the spinny thingy. Thankfully,
and I don't really have any news. A couple things I've covered in my weather blurb. But that's about it.
Well, I mean, I will say we, because someone else did all the work. But we lined up some inspectors and contractors or whatever. So we put a bid on the house. It was accepted last week. So we are currently trying to line everything up, get it inspected, secure the financing, and blah, blah, blah. So we've got that coming up. So we're really excited for that, as well as had a fantastic night with a good company and good food. Good to catch up and chat about the stuff we may or may never mention online while recording.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
So we'll move into what we've done lately for preps.
Well, I did a whole bunch of cleanup on my yard yesterday and today. Thankfully, a neighbor of mine rented a chipper for about a week or so. I got to use it yesterday morning with the gentleman who rented it, and very happy to get a whole lot of my yard back. I did a whole bunch of it yesterday and a bunch more of it today to finish it up. One of the other neighbors came over with his better chainsaw than mine and did a whole lot of cutting for me, stuff that I wouldn't be able to do with my little one. That was nice. A lot of work, and slowly getting my shed back into better shape, being a little bit more organized, and we'll take it from there.
Excellent. I got my winter toys put away, specifically my snowblower and my snowmobile. So I changed the oil, did a little bit of maintenance, that kind of stuff. Got a couple of my spring slash summer machines out. My lawnmower, which I'm probably not going to need for a little bit, but as Brad said, more exclusively my chainsaw. I had a couple of trees come down in the winter that will become part of my firewood pile very shortly. So I need to get going on that and get them out of the way.
All right. So for me, checked in with someone. So I was over at Brad's place and noticed one of his neighbors that got a tree pretty much fallen on their house. Thankfully, not much damage, but they had a friend come over with a portable sawmill. So I want to buy one. And then chit-chatted, and Brad had some trees down, and where we're looking is not too far from his place. So, okay, how much, not so much to rent it for me myself, but like come over and do some stuff or whatever. So I had a bit of a chit-chat with people around there, and hopefully line something up that when that time comes, if we knock some stuff down, we'll be able to make our own boards and stuff, or sell it for a stupid amount of people, or a stupid amount of money to people because they like the live edge stuff. And yeah, that's about all for me, and a crap load of work.
Oh, I can relate to the work thing. On my end, lucky you, bud. Lucky you.
Just wanted to put that out there.
Take advantage of it, man. I'll get there soon. Soon enough. Sooner than some of you. That's okay. So what have I done in the last little while? Well, I picked up a new set of boots, which I'm breaking in right now. They're on my feet. Lots of suggestions came in, so I ended up choosing a set of Loas. We'll see how they go. Also picked up another set of mitts for hunting and generally spending time outside practicing the things that I like to do. If you like to get trigger time and you like to shoot in ridiculous temperatures like minus 15, minus 20, because you're an idiot like me, then you might want to look into investing in some gloves, because it just makes it a completely different game. So pick that up. And last but not least, I'm working on the truck. My transportation needs some TLC, so it's getting a little bit of a suspension upgrade so I can handle the rough way into my cabin, and a few other bits and bytes that are going to make it a lot easier to get around with it. So that's what I've been up to. That's about it.
All right. So with that, and we'll move into the main topic. Again, it is a continuation of the conversation that we had a few weeks ago, where Gunny came on and kind of gave us the lowdown on his off-grid cabin. We kind of strayed a little bit sometimes from the topic. We'll try and sort of stay on it a little bit if we can, but it's going to be 2.0, and we'll just kind of have that chat and see where things go. So, Gunny, I'll turn it over to you if you want to start. I've got some ideas or questions, but you can go ahead and run with it.
Well, I can give you an idea of the path that my setup took, because my entire adventure for the last year has been to set up a cabin, which was just basically a very well insulated, finished cabin, but finished in the sense that there was a roof, there was a door, there was windows. That was all done, but there's no plumbing, which is great. That means I don't have to worry about a variety of things right now as of yet in there. But the main concern was the chimney. I didn't have a chimney yet. So there was a wood stove in there. Fantastic. So I was able to refinish it. And if any of you are picking up an old wood stove, do take the time to refinish it while it's out and it's free, and you can put it in a shelter or something like that, because it makes a ton of nasty dust. When you're refinishing that, you're going to need some wire brushes. I used a drill. You're going to want a powerful drill, a cordless drill. You'll be at it forever. You're going to want a corded drill. Run that on a generator, perhaps, if you're fully off the grid like I was. And it took about a day and a half just to refurbish and refinish the wood stove. Was it worth it? Oh, man, it looked so good once I put it in there. It was all freshly painted. It made a big difference. The other thing is you want to pay attention to your sealing. So, and I mean sealing, S-E-A-L. So that is the seals around the door is the biggest one. When it's completely off and out of the hearth and wherever you're going to put that wood stove in, that's when it's the time to refurbish the rope around the window and around the door if you have a window glass, et cetera, et cetera. So, your mileage may vary. It depends on your wood stove. Pay attention to cracks and holes in the wood stove if you're buying it used, because you may develop some weird leaks that are quite unwelcome at the best of times. So and could even be dangerous to your health. So that being said, I don't know anything about installing chimneys at this point, and I had to select a chimney. So I leaned on one of my very good friends who happens to be a certified HVAC fellow. Now, he's not just your average residential. He could cover that. He's on the commercial side, and he deals with commercial boilers and really serious industrial installations. So he was indispensable because I was as greenhorn as it gets to installing chimneys. But I took my time. I read the manual well. I looked at a few videos of people doing it online. I consulted my friend. I didn't know anybody else who had installed a chimney. So if you know nobody who's installed a chimney, take your time, do your research. I did all that before making my purchase. Don't buy a used chimney, folks. Just don't even think about it. There's a lot that can go wrong doing that. It's finding all the important accessories. If you're doing some sort of rickety shack and then back of nowhere just to heat up some equipment and you're not going to be sleeping in it, do whatever you want. That's your equipment. But when it's your life or somebody else's, man, don't mess around. Don't be that guy who burns himself down because he didn't pay attention. So I'll just say that because I was very concerned. I'm in the middle of nowhere. There's no fire truck to come and help. Good luck dialing 911. Cell phones don't work there. So
you're saying you should have some battery operated CO detectors?
Yes. Get yourself
stocked up. I was waiting for that. 11 minutes and 30 seconds. Well done, Brad.
Now, so pay attention to that. Everything needs to have a standardized air gap. When you're installing a chimney, there's code. You can look at code. If you go, a little suggestion for y'all out there, if you're able to go above and beyond what code says, you're probably going to be okay, right? But don't be afraid to go above and beyond, right? There's certain things you don't want to do, like fill in that air gap between the chimney side and the actual studs. A lot of people might be tempted to put insulation in there. Do not do that. It needs to have the air gap to function. I ended up speaking to the makers of the chimney because I had about 500,000 questions and they answered them all. So it was really good. Between my expert friend and the chimney folks, I managed to do it. Probably took some risks that most people shouldn't and probably never would. But I was working alone and I was working against time. So I was working alone up there. The last piece, getting it raised and up there, was probably the hairiest. But everything worked. It was airtight when I was done. So everything's still standing from the wood stove. So that was a big, big, big adventure getting that done. My first ever chimney. Would I do it again? Yep. But I would be prepared for more trouble this time. I would have much more jacks. I ended up using my jack to adjust the chimney height in order for the brackets to properly get all lined up with my thimble into the wall. What it boils down to, friends, is if you're installing a chimney, you've either got to go through the roof or through a wall. That's just the way it is. It's either going to go through the roof or through the wall. If you build your cabin or your house with that chimney gap in mind, designing it for that chimney and where it's going to go and where your wood stove is going to go, you're better off. This was a lot harder because I was retrofitting it. I was just choosing a spot and I had to cut a hole into the wall and make it work. I ended up having to cut a little bit out of my roof line so that I would have full clearance around the chimney. Safety around that chimney is really important. It's really key.
So, question for you, Jenny.
Yes, sir.
Would you be comfortable if somebody came to you and said, hey, can you help me put a chimney in like yours? Would you be comfortable to help them?
I think so, especially if it wasn't my install. Like if I made it clear, hey, I'm just helping you, but you're going to end up having to make all the decisions. And I'd be well placed to tell them, okay, now you're at a decision point. Like for example, where I was, oh crap, things don't quite fit the way they're supposed to. Go figure, right? Does that always happen? Yeah, it happens. Yep. So it's how do you shimmy it? How do you shift things, right? What's the right way? It depends. There is no right way. It depends, right? So I ended up using my 4-foot farm jack And that's what got me out of trouble that day. So yes, if anybody was in a jam and I was there to help them, absolutely, I'd be able to at least give them some advice and some pointers and tips to watch out for. One thing to always remember, and probably the scariest part for me, was cutting into my roof line, because it was a finished roof. And here I am, I'm cutting into the tin and into the fascia of the roof line. And I'm like, this seems wrong, right? But then the most nerve-wracking part was designing and building my own flashing run to fill in that square notch that I just cut into my roof line. And I have never done tin work. All right. Just complete. I want everybody to know I am not an expert in anything except a few domains in IT, because I've been doing that since, well, a long time, over a quarter century. So I've learned one thing or two about IT, but I know nothing about roofing. And I certainly know a lot less than that about flashing and how to install it. So I flew by the seat of my pants, and I had to do some origami in my mind, and then on a piece of board in order to get some dimensions and a half a clue of what I was doing. And I see Chris has a question here: double wall or single wall pipe? It was a double wall from the inside thimble all the way out into the top, and the very last 2.5 feet laterally and vertically were single wall. That was because I wanted that radiant heat on the insides to heat up the place very, very quickly. But I wanted it to be fully insulated going through the wall and up the side. It's a really good question. And I asked that question of my specialist friend, and he gave me a really coherent answer that I would like to maybe drop here for you all. So if you're building an ice fishing shack, you've got to consider the cost of putting in an insulated chimney. It may not be worth it. However, if at that point you can use a single wall chimney, you're going to end up replacing a lot faster because the heat cycles and the extreme of the cold on the outside with the heat on the inside is going to fatigue the steel and even cause it to prematurely rust a lot faster. So you can expect to get 3 to 4 years, maybe if you're lucky, out of one of those pipes, those single wall uninsulated. Now there's also double wall uninsulated pipes, and those are okay as well for inside application. On the outside, again, you lose a lot of the efficiency in your chimney if you have a lot of cold directly. Sorry, I'm saying that wrong. You need a hot chimney to be efficient. When you first start a fire, it's very smoky in that stove. And that's because the flue is still very cold, and it's not going to draw a lot of air through that stove while that chimney is cold. So you don't want to start a very, very massive fire right away in that chimney right away. You need to let it build up so that the heat in the flue builds up, and that creates it optimizes the draw that chimney can give when the chimney is hot. You lose all that efficiency of the hot chimney if it's not double insulated. So
and you lose a bit of the safety factor too. So I don't know if people can see behind me. That's basically the back end of my chimney. So it's single wall up to that box that goes through the roof. So mine goes straight up. That box is a double wall, and then there's the box that fits in between the studs or the rafters, whichever what you want to word it. And then it goes out through the roof, and it's a double wall up another 6 feet or so on the roof.
Yeah. And for code, one of the things I had to choose is if I'm going through my floors, how do I finish that? And you can do it up to code. Code says you have to build structure around it, and you have to give it an air gap. But, if you're not in a municipality where there is code on your structure because of its size or whatever the structure is, then maybe you can get away with just leaving that majorly important 2-inch or more air gap. Now, on that topic of air gap, a lot of you who will be building off grid are probably thinking the way I do, geez, I'm going to save a few bucks. I'm the frugal gunny. I'm always trying to save a buck if I can. So that means using rough cut dimensional timber. And that means it's a full 2x6. Now, a chimney kit that you purchase from the store, like your Home Depots and your Ronas and your Lowe's and all those places, those are all sized for regular dimensional finished lumber, dressed lumber, like we call it in the business. And that means you don't buy an actual 2x6, you're getting a 1.5 by 5.5 or so, if I'm not mistaken. So that's what your 2x6 actually is. So that 1 inch difference in the width between the studs. So a standard stud width is 16 inches. I'm going to try and keep my hands in camera here. So if I've got two studs at 16 inches on center, and in my case, mine are rough cut, I have an extra inch taken up just from the extra ½ inch on each board. So now, instead of having a 12-inch gap, creating a 12-inch thimble, creating a 2-inch gap for my 14-inch space, I now have an extra inch to contend with. So I had to do some creative carving and notching in there to have my thimble fit properly into a perfect 2x6 on center opening. So keep that in mind. If you're building with rough cut lumber, that gap where you put your chimney, you can plan ahead for it if you know what your thimble dimensional requirements are. So in other words, if you purchased your thimble first, the thimble guide will tell you, you must have a gap this wide to fit your thimble in. It's usually going to be for 16 inches. So if you're working with your rough cut full 2x4 or 2x6 timber, just make sure where you're going to frame that portion for your chimney, give it a proper gap to maintain the illusion, the same spacing you would have in a 16-inch on center dressed wall, and that is a 14-inch gap, right? A 14-inch gap, so you have a 2 inches, 2 inches on each side of air gap. You must have 2 inches of air gap between your hot steel thimble and any consumable. So whether that is, if you're insulated with paper, that means you can't have paper insulation within 2 inches of where that thimble wall is. If you're framed with wood, you must make sure that that wood frame is 2 inches away from the hot metal edge of that thimble. So just keep that in mind when you're framing for a chimney. Plan ahead if you know you're going to put in a chimney. Look up your chimney kit and make sure you know about your spacing. Jared's got a good point here about cold causing a quicker buildup of creosote. He is absolutely right. If you have an uninsulated chimney, and I ran an uninsulated chimney when I took my tent up north for hunting in 2019, and we were using whatever we could find, wood that was felled and already fairly well seasoned. And because it's much colder outside, it takes a long time for that flue to warm up, and in the meantime, it creates a ton of creosote. We could actually see the stuff gooping out of the chimney gaps out of the foil tape we use to to properly seal the sections off. We ended up seeing creosote just dripping out of there in the first day of use. So if you're intending to live in this thing for longer than a few months, if it's just a quick improvised shelter, hey, you do what you have to. But if you're talking about a live-in cabin, a place you're going to live, man, don't skimp out. Get the double insulated chimney, and bear also in mind that a chimney that is old will not be covered by any sort of warranty of any kind. So if you burn yourself out because you bought a used chimney and try to just jerry-rig it into your gear, not a good way to go. So it was probably one of the more expensive add-ons to the cabin, other than the solar, was doing that chimney work. Was it worth it? Every penny, because when it's minus 35 or minus 40 out, I've got 25 to 30 degrees inside, and sometimes too hot if I actually go really hot. Now, speaking of creosote and heat, Again, we know that a cold flue and a cold stove generates more creosote. So what can we do to mitigate that? I can't say it enough. You need to clean your chimney. I think we talked about this in spring cleaning. You need to clean your chimney at least twice a year if you're going to put creosote wood in there. So some types of wood will create more creosote than others. And the type of wood you have access to will depend on your region. So know your region, know your wood, know your firewood sources, and have an idea of what it is you're burning. The general good ones are your oaks and your maples. Up where I'm from, we don't have oak or maple. What we do have, though, locally is poplar. Now, green poplar will burn, but it just kind of sputters and it won't really go very well. But if I'm really in a jam, it will burn. The thing with poplar is that it doesn't generate a lot of creosote at all. And in fact, it doesn't generate much ash either. So it's a pretty good burn. Does it generate as much heat as some of the other hardwoods in my area? Well, no, there's birch in my area, and that generates a ton more heat than poplar, but it also generates a lot of creosote. So keep that in mind. I do like to start my fires with a softwood, so any kind of spruce, cedar makes fantastic starters. So that's fine. Just don't make it a habit of burning all that wood all the time. If you're really hard up, man, people will burn whatever they can find. And if you're the kind of individual that gets their firewood from going venturing for it in the bush, such as in Crown land, know that you can legally harvest any dead wood. So if it's standing dead tree, that's fine. You can take that. But if you take a live tree, you could be in a world of trouble. Forestry folks do not take kindly to you coming and taking the trees down, and the conservation officers will also not take kindly to that. So be careful of that.
And I can say from my end, I get the offer. I have a couple of friends who are arborists, so I get offers of free wood frequently. And I'll take anything. I'll take poplar. I'll take birch. I'll take. Obviously I want the hardwood, but, I took a load of softwood one time and somebody made a offhanded comment, and my offhanded comment back was, hey, when it's minus 30, I'll still be warm and you won't be. So,
Yep.
even if you've got the softwood or any wood, as long as you season it properly, you shouldn't have a problem. And that's the one big thing. I know, Gunny, you mentioned about burning the green wood. You can if you have to, but you are going to be into the creosote problem. And like you said, it sputters. It doesn't want to burn well. I say to everybody, season your wood. Like, it just amazes me the amount of people that will get wood and they'll have a pile of wood on dirt, and then they'll throw a tarp over the top of it for the summer, and wonder why when it comes the fall, it's not dry. So,
and to Jeff's topic,
you're not getting sun to it. You're not getting wind to it. You're not getting anything. Rain on it is not going to make it wet. It's so.
Actually, and yeah, let's clear up some misconceptions about firewood since we're at it. And it's worthwhile doing, because if you're living off the grid, you don't have a whole lot of choices when it comes to your heat. You could truck in propane, and that's fine. What if you're landlocked like me, though, and the roads haven't been redone in 30, 40 years? No truck is going to get through there without a lot of road work to bring in your propane. So you've got to pay attention to your wood. Seasoning your wood is when you leave it out in the airflow, out in the sun, out in the rain even, so that the elements themselves start to cure the wood. And that's to allow the wood to have its moisture escape the wood. That's what green wood is. It's wood that's just been freshly cut. And it's really not a wise idea to burn that in your chimney unless you're in a really bad jam. And I mean a really bad jam. And it's probably not safe to do that. If you're in a really bad jam, that's when things happen at the worst of times. You don't want that. So a big focus of being off the grid is in preparing for the winter. And so that means preparing for the winter the year before. I'm going to repeat that again. You prepare for the winter the year before not that season. That's the smart way to go about it. So that means you go collect and follow your trees and you let them sit. Hey, if you can build a roof structure, a roofing structure over your wood so that it doesn't get any rain but has lots of airflow, hey, great. It'll season even faster. But there's a misconception that it won't season if it's out in the rain. Not true. It will season in the rain, and that's what I've got a pile over here at my lady's house. We've got a pile of maple there stacked from last year from a branch that was just in the way, and she had it trimmed, and that was pretty wise of her. She said, could you use this firewood? And I said, some nice hardwood maple? You bet I could. Up north, that stuff is going to be worth gold in the minus 30s and 40s. Way too hot for minus 10. So keep that in mind too. There's an optimal size for your fires. So if you're cutting big logs, you're still going to have to manage them down for the kind of temperatures you're heating for. If you've never heated with a wood stove before, just expect to have to be down to your undies at some point and open all the windows, because you're probably going to overheat at one point or another. And then again, the safety factor comes into play. Measure the distance between your wood stove and your consumable things that are in the area. I can't state that enough. Floor preparation is an essential. In my structure, I used aluminum tin on the floor as a very basic thing, just to keep any burning anything that would come out of that wood stove away from anything wooden exposed structure. The other thing you are going to want to do is always, always, always have a fire extinguisher. I think that should go without saying. You all have a fire extinguisher, right? Right? Yep. Everybody nod. Yeah. Everybody out there in the virtual world. Yep. Yeah, let's all nod. Yep. Yes, we all have a fire extinguisher. It's
do y'all know how to use it?
Do you know how to use it? I know I do.
I'll YouTube it when I need to.
Oh yeah, there's the right way, I'm sure, and I'm sure there's a few people who have other creative ways.
And I would even say that even taking that maple up, even if you don't need to use it or you can refrain from using it, I think that might not be a bad way to maybe smoke and cure some of your meat that you may harvest.
Yeah,
dual purpose. But I mean, like, right? So even getting back to the softwood, that'll cause a lot of buildup and everything. Still not bad to have a pile of it where, you know, if you have friends come over in the summer and, oh, let's build a little a little fire and sit down and, you know, have some water, you know, and sit there and have a bonfire for a few hours, you know, might not be good to have that not desired wood that you want to burn inside. So you're not, you know, using 15 logs of your really, really good stuff, you know. Have a pile of, this is the outside burn pit, and have this is the inside burn pit.
Yes, and that's what we do up at the property as well. We have a common fire pit for everybody to go and hang out, and that's where we put the more punkier wood. For those of you who know nothing at all about fireplaces and firewood and wood stoves, punky is when your wood's a little rotten inside, and that stuff doesn't burn. It just smolders a bit, gets kind of stinky. It won't burn, and you don't want to put that. Oh, it's a great smudge. Absolutely. Great smudge, but you don't want to have that burning in your wood stove. It's just going to take up room and just be a pain. So that's why it's important to season your wood. You need that airflow around it. I keep two separate piles. I keep a pile of my everyday poplar for heavy fires, and I have a pile of cedar and jack pine. And that cedar and jack pine is what I'll use to start a fire. And then outside we have a mixture of anything we can get our hands on. So, for example, when we are trimming back the local alder, tag alder bush, we chop that up. Well, after a year sitting out in the sun, that is perfect firewood to throw into a fire pit. And it turns out that alder is also good for smoking salmon. So I'm learning about what to do with all of the local species. And if you don't know what your local species are, you know what? That's a good start. We talked about last week about breaking in new preppers. Well, that means yourself too. If you're, not familiar with something, well, just start by looking around. You don't have to go and know everything about every region in the country and across the landscape. Just start with home first. Start with your backyard. There's all kinds of cool stuff in your backyard. Identify them. Take photos, go online, look it up. There's apps to do that too now. So I'm old school. I like to do it with books because books work without power. And I'm off the grid. So you see there's a bit of a theme going on here. No power, right? So processing firewood without power. I use axes an awful lot. I have two sizes of axes. I have a little 19-inch hand axe type deal. Or is it a 17 or 19? And I have a larger 28-inch felling axe. And I have a larger, I think it's a 32-inch splitting axe. And if you go out there on YouTube and you look up a guide on axes, oh man, you're going to be flooded with people who are telling you need to go buy a $200 axe or else you're just missing the boat. Wrong. I looked into this a while back. I have been very disappointed with a lot of the commodity brand name axes you can buy in the store. They're just the old wooden handle and axe head. So what's been lost over the years is hand fitting, and it's hand fitting that makes a good axe head to handle fit. So you can avoid all of that trouble if you pick up an inexpensive, made in, I believe it's Finland, and please don't crucify me if I got this wrong, Fiskars. Fiskars axes, friends, they're phenomenal tools.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're
This makes a really good product.
They really do. They're lopers for pruning and cutting trees and trimming back trees. Phenomenal quality. You're getting good steel with a good edge at an incredibly fair price, even with today's crazy inflation prices. So I don't buy $200 axes. I'd rather have 3 or 4 purposeful axes that each have a proper use and that I can buy spares of, and I don't feel badly because I just spent that much money.
So,
and not just that, being up there and needing it probably more reliable than the person that can send it off easily, get the warranty. You'd be better off getting a good head with 2-3 spare handles compared to the $300 axe that's the Cadillac of axes.
Yeah, if you're going to go
when that fails for you,
Oh, I agree 100%. If you're going to go with a traditional axe form factor, the wooden handle and the head and the wedge, by all means do that. But as Pierre says, have spares, because when you're off the grid, everything. Just a little hint, if you haven't figured this out yet from all of our talks, everything takes, I don't know, a quarter to 150% longer. Let me repeat that. Everything takes a quarter, so 25% to 150% longer to do when you're off the grid. That's why people love flipping the switch. Okay, and I get it.
And John put a comment in the live chat there that he talked his wife into getting a wood stove this past winter. It was so great. He's on 49 acres, and he's using an app on his phone to identify the trees.
Nice.
I don't have that app. I've heard of it. I've heard it's good things.
Yeah.
And of course, he then says, I need to build a woodshed. Absolutely. And you know what? I'll tell you what I built, John, and it's very simple. I bought the concrete little pads for under a deck. They're square and they've got the 4x4. You can drop a 4x4 hole in it. I put 8 of them in a circle. Yep. 12 feet by 10 feet. So I ran the 2 sides and I ran another one down the middle. I just stuck 4x4 posts in there, cut them off on an angle, ran 2x4s across the top on both ways, and put a couple of pieces of tin on the roof. That's all I did. And it's wide open. It's wide open to the air and to the sun, and it just keeps the rain off the top of it. Took me a day and a half. That's it.
I used pallets myself for my woodshed, as Chris Biggs notes. So that's what I did. And John's got another great question, whether I go with a mall or a little electric splitter. Well, for the volume that I want to do next year, I'm planning on getting a little electric because I can run that off my generator or off my battery pile on a nice sunny day. I've got plenty of power there to run an electric. The beauty of an electric, is because it's a temporary load. It's not a full-on, always-on load. And so you're going to have a high load for a few seconds and then none while you flip the log away, put another one on. And so lithium and larger arrays lend themselves well to that kind of workload. But for now, I'm doing everything by hand, and that's kept me in great shape and also warm. So that's the advantage, they say, of firewood, is it'll warm you when you're taking it down. If you're cutting it down with an axe, it is a bit of a workout.
It warms you twice.
It does warm you twice. And in fact, it'll warm you up just to trim the branches on the lower section of the tree so that it's safe for you to work. And on that note, having an axe does not mean that you cannot pay attention to safety when you are cutting down a tree. It is just as dangerous, if not even more dangerous, to cut a tree with an axe. Did I say cut an axe with a tree? Cut a tree with an axe. Because there's a sense of safety that you might feel. It's a bit illusional. It's because it's quiet. So you think, oh, there's no danger here, right? You must be even more vigilant with an axe. With one or two hits, could be the finishing hit, and then you start to hear it go. And once that tree starts to go, you're not stopping it by hand. Just get out of the way. So you have to have a good, clear runway out. Your important basics of tree cutting do not go away with an axe, right? So there's lots of great sources.
Tree's still going to come down hard.
That's right. That's right. And if there's any one reason to cut things down by hand, is to clear a safety area around your structure. We talked about fire safety already once, but there's also the fact that when a tree falls, it just makes a real nasty mess of any structures that are in the way. So at the moment I'm using axes, but it's a good workout. It takes a good half an hour just to prep a tree and fell it, and that's at full bore. So after that, I'm kind of winded.
So question then. So we've kind of covered over the heating side of it now.
Yes.
So what do? You say you have no plumbing or anything like that. So what do you do for water?
Okay, awesome. That was another important one. I love covering the big threes, which are your shelter, your food, and your water. Water comes before food, as we know. So
it's funny. We had a discussion about that. I'll just throw this in as a quick segue.
Yes.
That I was talking with a new prepper there a couple of weeks ago, and they were just on food. And I said, the threes of prepping, and he's like, well, not really. And I said, well, you know, these are just guideline numbers. Bad things start to happen when you get to this. I said, it's 3 minutes without air. You really can't prep for that. It's just going to happen.
Yeah.
But covering on the wood stove and all that is 3 hours without adequate shelter in adverse conditions, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. I said, you've got all this food, but you haven't planned anything for a shelter, and you haven't planned anything for water.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where I find a lot of newer preppers get tied up in and I don't know why, but they just get tied up in the food thing and they forget about everything else. And I said to him, you're wasting all your time on item number 4 when you haven't addressed item 2 and 3. So,
and if we can take and I love that little that little break we just took there to talk about shelter and prepping. The reason why I feel quite okay to spend time on prepping a cabin is because I already have my other shelter preps figured out and lined up. Okay. So let's reiterate that. I already have a 12 by 12 expedition tent with a little portable wood stove. So I got that box checked off. I already have little tents to sleep in the summertime and the other 3 seasons. So that's a far less high expense than, say, buying a property and having another cabin. And that's a big deal to get into. You can buy a tent for a lot less. You can go mobile for a lot less. And the reason I talk about this, and I'll break into this, I hope, in another dedicated show, mobility as a concept. If you work on surviving mobility or in a mobility scenario, and I'm talking about shelter in a mobility scenario. So let's address that for a moment because it's an important thing. Before I had that cabin, I had already figured out a couple of shelters for myself up there, and I had a plan for another small off-the-grid shelter, and then the cabin came along and I didn't have to build it. So let's talk about it. The ultimate shelter for portability is a tarp, a poncho to be precise, because the poncho, you can also wear it as a raincoat. You can use it to carry water. You can use it to carry sticks. You can use it to carry dirt, to camouflage stuff. Man, we did everything with our ponchos. So ponchos rock. So if you don't have a poncho and you're thinking that you need to buy a $3,000 trailer to tow behind your car, get the poncho first. And here's why. Your car will give up on you, but the poncho won't. The poncho will fit in a backpack. The car won't. All right? Think practically. If your car goes on you and you're in the middle of nowhere, that poncho is going to be a lifesaver. All right? So I talk about simple prep items because, hey, I'm frugal. Okay? I don't have money to go and spend on the big, latest and greatest of everything. But if I have that one item that can save me and give me shelter, or if I have a tool with which I can prepare shelter in a limited amount of time, okay, it takes energy to create a shelter and build a shelter. And if it's minus 20 or minus 30 and you're exposed, well, Jeff said it, 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter gives you an exposure problem. And a lot of people in Canada suffer greatly from exposure and die from exposure. It happens. It's a frequent thing, actually. Ask anybody who comes here unprepared across the border. A lot of them, unfortunately, die, right? This is harsh weather. So know how to provide shelter for yourself, and it doesn't have to be expensive. I can provide shelter for myself with a simple little shovel, an axe, and a little handsaw. One of those little silky handsaws, they're fantastic. I have one and they're great. All the other little handsaws I've had before, they're no good. So at first, when I was up there on my property, I was cutting trees down with a little silky saw because it was quick and it was less energy. It was hot that day and it was less high energy to use that little saw than to break out the big axe. So there's an efficiency in hand tools in that you can carry them with you. They would work all the time, but there's an amount of energy that goes along with using them. And that will also affect your preps in terms of the water, right?
And they're less likely to fail due to forgetting the gas in the car.
Precisely. So in that same vein, on the topic of water, last year, one of my gaps was that I didn't yet have any eavesdropping nor rain barrels on the cabin, right? It was just a tin roof, and that's great. Tin roof. I love a tin roof. I love the sound, but I needed those eavesdrops. So I put in the gutters last year, late in the year, and I also have the rain barrels now. So what this means is I can now move on to the next thing, which is all the other stuff that you can do once you have accumulated some water. So the local hard water, it's a bit of a hard water. It's kind of irony. It's got a brownish kind of color. So very rich in minerals. Very high water table. If I dig a hole, I got water coming up within 2 hours. If I dig a hole just 2 or 3 feet deep, that hole will be half filled within 2 or 3 hours. Very, very high water table. So if you're in a situation where you have a very high water table, you can always put in some sort of shallow well pump. And that can at least provide you with water to do things like put out fires or fill up containers with. For filling up containers, the unit of choice for people off the grid is most definitely the IBS container, or is that what it's called? The ICB?
ICB tote.
ICB totes. Thank you. IBS is a completely different thing. Totally different thing. So ICB totes are the darling of the preppers. I see them everywhere on any prepper's yard. Up north,
black plastic and duct tape or black paint to paint it to keep the algae from growing in it.
Good advice. What I was told was in a very, very large Freya likes my IBS mistake on that one. Oh, I'm going to be full of those. So I'll keep you all entertained with that. So I was also told you can put a little bit of bleach in the water. So this isn't something you're going to want to drink out of, I'm pretty sure. And if anybody's thinking they're going to drink from their rainwater, I wouldn't really recommend it. If you've read any of the studies of what's in rainwater today, there's some nasty stuff. What are you pointing at there, Brad?
He's got the Berkey.
Oh, the Berkey filter.
Yes. Oh, they're crazy expensive, but man, they're life changing.
No,
they're life changing.
Every freaking penny.
Yeah.
Get yourself one. That one is one of the smallest versions you can get. I actually got that from Eric at Rapid Survival. Go and get a couple of extra sets of filters for it.
Yeah.
My plan is if I lose power and lose ability to pull from the well, but I'm still in the rainy season, I do have an IBC tote. Takes 1,000 liters to fill it. I've put plastic all around it. I can pull out of that, change my filters in the Berkey to a brand new set, run my rainwater through it, and drink it. When the power comes back on, whatnot, put those filters away for the next time I need them and go back to my regular filters. We're good.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And Freya, I hate you. You got 2 Berkeys secondhand for $250. Please tell me where I can pull that deal.
That's a very good deal.
That's a really good price. Can I be your friend?
Yeah.
And rain barrels. Can we talk about how expensive they are these days? Wow. I just about fell off my chair when they told me how much I had to pay.
Cheap rain barrel.
Yeah, and the one thing Chris said.
Go to a
the neighbor's yard and wait for them to go to bed.
Yeah.
Hey, stop stealing my ideas, Pierre.
We all know the sewer supply people. Well, not sewers, but water main supply. Emco Waterworks is a big one in Canada. You can get the corrugated plastic culverts from them. You can buy the caps for the ends of them. Sometimes you can buy those cheaper than a rain barrel, and you can cut it to whatever height you need. You put the cap on the end of it, put it out next to your shed, you got a rain barrel.
Oh, that's a good tip.
And just to reiterate too on the comment that Chris Biggs made there, if you can, make sure that whatever you're going to store your water in and whatever, if you can, make sure it's a food grade plastic. You don't want something leaching into your water, and sometimes you can't get them, but you should really, really make a solid effort to make sure that what you're using is considered food grade.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Chris. IBC totes also are used to ship chemicals, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I was about to say, I was like, if
olive oil.
Yeah.
And olive oil, cooking oil, tons of different chemicals. You just got to be careful where you buy them from. I got mine for free, thankfully. I don't know what the heck was in the bottom of it. Excuse me. I don't know what the heck was in the bottom of it. Bleach, dish soap, and a pressure washer. Cleaned it out. It's not perfect. I know that, but I can still, I can still use it to collect the rainwater, and then I can boil it, throw it through the Berkey. I'm pretty confident that I'd be able to drink it.
Very nice. And for anybody who still isn't clued in on this one, if you have any kind of standing water or flowing water that you have access to, just boil it for a good solid 5 minutes at a rolling boil. So it's got to be one of those rolling boils. You got to see the water churning at the top. It's got to boil full on for 5 minutes. If it just reaches a boil like you do for tea or coffee, that does not kill all of the beasties inside. That could make you a very, very, very sick person. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. Another thing we should talk about water, being that we're in Canada, is that the stuff freezes. stuff freezes. So standing water will freeze and will start to reshape your life for you and your terrain and all of your things for you. So it's an important thing to pay attention to. Springtime is when you'll notice it the most during the thaw, because you still have frozen ground partially to deal with. It's not fully draining away any water that is coming in. And so you typically get a lot of flooding in the springtime when all that snow runoff hits you too. So these are times to pay attention to that. And that's hot on my mind coming back up since we're on the topic of water. What else could we say about water? Or have we harped on that enough?
We need it.
So
we need it. It's important. Don't forget about it in your preps. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm curious. So up where you are, I've seen a few pictures of it, and I haven't had the opportunity to go up there yet. But what did you do for water? Like, did you have a little pond, a little ravine, or did you from time to time when you could go pick up, those 4-liter jugs for 97 cents at Walmart and like kind of store those away or whatever? So like, what did you do for water supplies while you were off grid?
Yes, I did all that. I did all of those. So when I first got there, all I had was 3 25-gallon jugs. And I happened to know from some of the other friends that I had who had been up there too and were in the area that there was a spring about it's on the way to Kirkland Lake, which is 35 minutes away. And so the spring is maybe 20 minutes away, 25 minutes away or so. So what I started to do was whenever I would go into town, I would make sure that I had a jug with me. And over the course of the year, I picked up a couple of extra jugs. So I'm now up to something like 6 or 7 jugs. And now when I take a run to town, to Kirkland Lake, I just toss all of the jugs into the truck if I'm low on water, and I do a run. Because this spring is free and it runs year round. And if you're lucky enough to live in an area where there's a spring, man, that's a great way to get you started. But man, it's a pain. It's a pain. Yeah. Because water is a special beast to move around. It has so much momentum in the container that it's hard on the vehicles. So it's not something you want to do and rely on for very, very long if you want your preps to have any kind of, what's the word we like to use these days? That's
self-reliance.
Oh, yeah. Well, self-reliant or sustainable. That's the word they keep throwing at us all the time. So, yeah, sustainable is the idea. Can you keep it going for a long time, right? And so right now, I wouldn't want to be pumping my water from a lake using a gas motor, right? No. Because you got to keep that thing fueled. You got to maintain it. All motors break. So if you're bringing up your water with a pump, that means you need a spare pump and means you need tools perhaps. And now you're, I say that every machine I have that runs a motor is another mouth to feed. So how are you going to take care of that mouth that you just bought? So if I bought a generator welder, I just bought another mouth to feed. So I got to feed this thing oil and fuel if I want to weld in the field. But welding in the field means I can repair stuff. Oh, crap. So if I want that capability, there's a cost, right? Yep. And that's the notion.
There's an up and down, right? Like there's that balance for both where.
Absolutely.
Which one, at some point, the pros outweigh the cons, but sometimes the cons outweigh the pros where it's like, for a chainsaw, right? Like, those things fails, you blow a motor, you need spark plugs, you need to sharpen this, you need to sharpen that.
That's right.
Chainsaw is convenient, but if you're off grid, you probably don't really have the 9 to 5 hustle, the 2 hours of traffic going in and out. You're not wasting 20 minutes and $20 at Starbucks every morning. All those things where it's like, yes, it's a lot more convenient to use a chainsaw and just go, and everything comes down and then you just split it where it's like, maybe that costs to have the oil, the mixed gas, the chain, all these things. You might be better off taking that, $300 chainsaw cost into an axe or two, a spare handle, a little saw, and if you're some wedges. If you're completely off grid, like your time is way different than doing the weekend thing, like most of people do, right?
100%. And on the quick note of axes, if you're going to buy tools, also buy the kit you need to maintain them. So if I buy an axe, that means I need to have a sharpening stone or some sort of way to grind that axe head back into shape, because typically it's the top edge of the forward edge of the blade that gets nicked into the ground because, you know, you're splitting the log. So that tip is going to keep going forward. So get into the habit whenever you're buying a tool or a necessity for your preps. So if it's related to water or food or shelter, these are probably the most essential things of all that we could prepare for. So make sure you have a little bit of redundancy, because they fail at the very worst of times, right? Yep. When you least expect it, that Murphy's Law is there to catch you.
Just going to say, Mr. Murphy shows up when you least expect it.
Oh, yeah.
That axe handle is going to break right after you did your monthly trip into town. You got everything, right? You get back. All right, I got my water, right? I got my 15 liters of gas for my generator that I'm going to moderate, right? And then you're like, okay, I'm going to go chop a tree, and then bang, it breaks, right?
Yes. Denny Denny mentioned the bow saw, and yeah, a bow saw is good too.
Machete comes in nice and handy to clear some small trees as well, small branches.
Yep. And on the topic of cutting implements and clearing implements, because that's a lot of what I did in the last year, was clearing brush and stuff. The kukri is an extremely useful tool for me up there. So if I'm clearing brush and I just have a machete, I'm going to end up running into some wrist or forearm sized even type timber in the form of little poplars or aspen, trembling aspen, or alder. And the machete fails miserably on those, but I don't want to carry 15 tools, because that starts to get heavy and you get sweaty, and I like to clear brush, you know, when it's decent weather. So the kukri, I discovered, is an incredible tool to cut down those little trees that are wrist size or smaller with one swing.
The way the blade's angled, it's a lot easier on the wrist too, right? Like if you're doing an upward thing and you take 2-3 summers of, like, you know, using potentially the wrong tool compared to, you know, you just go to, you know, marketplace and you buy 3 axes or whatever, like chopping down trees, like it's going to hurt the joints.
It does.
So
it absolutely does, Pierre.
And guess what? Like, you know, if you already went to town on that monthly budget, like you're not going to be able to go get, you know, anything to help with the joint pain, the swelling of your whatever. So whatever you can get, right? Like there are different options. Yes, you may need to have, you know, 6 different things to do whatever, and you just pick and choose when to do them nicely. Would be way better off than doing this. And then, you know, 3 years later, you can't hold an axe anymore. Like you got to get out of there as fast as possible, because like you're not doing yourself any good, right? So like
to Pierre's point, your manual prep tools like my axes and my brush axe, that's another one that I use, also known as a Sandvik. Some people used to call it that, a Sandvik. That's a pretty useful little tool too. It's a lot safer than a full machete or kukri. But I found the traditional kukri was really an incredible tool, because I could just carry it on my hip, and most of the time I had it in my hand, and it swings so quickly and easily, and it's not hard on the wrists like using a hatchet can be, or a machete can be really hard on the wrists depending on its shape and size, right?
Yeah, you hit the wood and it's a hard wood or whatever, and that shock, like it'll hurt your wrist after you do, you know, you hit a tree 20 times there, your wrist and it also gives you an excuse to go buy something else. That's cool.
Oh, this is true. Now this year I've invested in a little electric chainsaw that's compatible with all my batteries. I mentioned that on a previous show, and that's going to change the game, because now I've got an option to quickly zip through a little area and be done with it. And I can give the hand tools a break and my body a break, because the reality is in your late 40s and where I'm at now, you know, your joints aren't the same as they used to be. Muscle can come back, and it does. If you keep working it, it'll go. but your joints are not the same at a certain age. So all you young people out there, take advantage of it while you have it. Use the axes, use the hand tools, save your money, use your bodies while you can, because you don't want to sit around all day just using power tools. It's good for your body to do stuff. It's good for me.
So getting at that age, like, is one of your plans this year to put like a walker path? Getting it?
He's not as old as Scott, okay?
I'm not quite that old.
I'm just saying, right? But like, so so that might be something you got to think about too, right? Like, how wheelchair accessible is this place now? Right?
It's not at all. It's ATV accessible, and so if you can get onto your ATV.
Danny, back to the whole water issue. Have you thought about, looked at, considered? I'm not necessarily saying for drinking water, but maybe for anything else you need, of maybe putting some kind of an RV or a trailer, some kind of a water tank and a 12-volt pump just to give you some running water?
Yes, actually. It turns out that same system of batteries that I have for the chainsaw and my drill and my grinder, my jigsaw, and all that, it's all the same batteries. Turns out that they also make a water pump that runs on those batteries. So I'm planning on getting one of those this year so that I can move water from my rain barrels or any IBC totes or any of my larger containers, so I can transfer the water to and from. But this year I'm also focusing on hand pumps. So I always want to have an alternative to move that water and then to store it. Now, to store it is going to be another challenge. And what I was thinking of doing, because I have a tiny cabin, 12 by 16. And so a 12 by 16 cabin is really small, friends, if you actually are an adult with stuff. If you're young and you don't yet have a lifetime full of stuff, then that's fine. Fill your boots. But otherwise, you're going to need some storage. So how to store water off the grid where things freeze. So freezing causes water to expand, and then containers that are made of plastic and metal don't fare well under ice because ice expands, things crack and break, and now the water thaws, the ice thaws, and now you got leaks, and it's a nightmare. So I was thinking of building a shower/sauna into a portion of my shed that I'm building. That would allow me to suspend a water container up high. That would be, say, at a higher level than the wood stove that I'm planning on dropping in there too. So with a wood stove and a water container higher up, say in the rafters of the ceiling perhaps, or some other tower system that I can build inside the shed, because it's a 12 by 12 with 9-foot ceilings. And I'm going to have a 6 by 12 pitch, 6 to 12 pitch. So that should give me enough clearance up there in the rafters to put up some sort of container. Now, the only concern is if I am leaving for any extended period of time, I have to have a way to drain it because I'm concerned about freezing cycles. So I haven't yet figured out how to do the longer term water storage inside yet. Still working on that solution. Working in the extreme cold unattended is a completely different concept of operations than a lot of people run into. So if any of you out there listening in or watching us have run through this challenge and figured out a way, please let me know. I'm all ears. I'd love to hear how you do it. I'm still working on that water business. So yeah, right now it's still very, very manual, very portable, having to haul the water to where I'm using it. So working on that as well this year, as well as a hot shower.
Well, I was gonna ask a question of one last thing, and we can sort of look at potentially wrapping it up. I mean, we could go on for hours with this, which is great. But what, and this is a bit of a, I wouldn't say a touchy subject, but what do you do with your bio waste and your biohazard, if you know what I mean? And where do you do with that?
So
that's kind of an important thing.
It really is. When I first got there, the first few weeks, because I didn't have a setup yet, I would do what I did, what I was taught when I was long time ago in this thing called cadets, and long time ago in this thing called the reserves. We were taught what to do when we were out on recce and we had to go do our business. And what that consisted of was finding a tree. You scrape away the surface stuff. So that's typically some loose dirt, leaves, rotting matter, sticks, whatnot. And you do your business there. And if you do have the luxury of having teepee with you at the time, that's funny. The luxury of teepee. So yeah, we didn't always have teepee when you're out in the run and you got to do your business like that in a rush. So whatever you use to wipe with, you leave there, and then you bury it all back so it's invisible and not seen, right? And the other important thing about that is that nature senses and smells it all. So that's another reason to try and keep your tracks low, right? It will alter the course of animal behavior around you if you start pooping in the woods for a long time. So I didn't enjoy doing that for long, but I had to. And so I went for a walk far into the woods. If you're going to do that, you want to go very far from where your water source is, friends. So just keep that in mind. So that's what I did at first. And then very quickly, what I started to do was do my business in bags in a bucket with a toilet seat. Just a good 5-gallon pail with one of those. You can
buy them at Canadian Tire. They're called a Lugaloo.
The Lugaloo. Yep. And all I did, because I'm kind of tall, the typical Lugaloo is just too short for me. So I used a tall 5-gallon pail that was just right for my height. And I ordered, I think the brand is Reliance makes these. Yep. And it's just the portable toilet seat that fits perfectly on a 5-gallon bucket. And I do that upstairs in the dry, in the warmth of my cabin with all the windows open. And when I'm done, it gets all sealed up in a bag and it gets burned. I burn it. Why do I burn it? Because to bury it causes all kinds of troubles that you have to deal with in terms of M&R, in terms of sewers. You know, we are near a creek. So I don't want to have to deal with M&R permits for moving in a a septic tank, because then we need to have the roads ready for a shitter pump truck to come in and empty that. And that's just, man, now I'm paying for more than the cabin just to have a truck come in and service my septic. And no, I'm just not going to go that route. And so I thought back, well, how did they do it before? What did we do before back in the day? And I thought back to the practical things so we did. Well, that was one thing.
They didn't have much food, so they only went like once a month.
We used to do the outhouse, right, in a pit. Yeah. But the best thing is just to burn it. And a lot of people are going to gasp and go, oh, my God, you're putting out all the carbon. I don't know. I'm a bit of a skeptic, folks, because newsflash, trees, anything green, it actually consumes carbon.
And
makes oxygen.
You're also off grid using mostly hand tools, so you're just offsetting your normal consumption by burning it, right?
Correct.
So it's kind of like living in the city then, your carbon footprint. So it's not much different than everybody else listening.
Well, and to Pierre's point, if you have to also consider the cost of me driving my poop, 20 kilometers to a dump where I'm not supposed to dump it. What's better?
But you don't want to get into an accident with 6 5-gallon pails in the back of your car.
I don't want to get into the business of moving poop.
Literally be a shitty situation.
It's not a business I'm getting into, not even for me. Right?
Paramedics pull up, and they'll just be like, yeah, he's dead. I'm not dealing with that, right? Like, wouldn't want to get rear-ended with that. But
so that's what I do. I burn it. And I see somebody saying there about not peeing in the same place as doing number 2. I don't do that. I keep everything very separate. And here's the other thing. If you're living in the bush, it's a good habit to go and pee along the perimeter of your home, especially if there's any men in the household. Get them to go pee around the property. This is a big deal. This signals to all the other predators that there's someone here. There's a male here. And if you're going to start going, I'm sorry, the animal kingdom doesn't care what you think you are. It cares about the smell of your pee. That is it. what you think you are does not affect the smell of your pee.
No.
What you eat,
And
probably. Yep. What you drink, surely, yes, but not what you think. So just keep it at that. So men, you need to go out there and spread your pee around, because it is well known bears do get seen by women more often, and that's probably because ladies' products tend to smell a heck of a lot nicer than men's products do. Right?
Depends what they ate.
It could have a lot to do with what they eat, but it's a fact. The bears are more attracted to women than they are to the men. So keep that in mind, fellas. Go out there and pee around your homes, around your camp.
I do that all the time, and I live in the city.
Now, we got a great suggestion here from Freya, saying that for a bucket toilet, you can use sawdust or wood pellets on top of waste to stop the smell if you use it multiple times. Yes, you can use sawdust. It's very, very effective. If you happen to process a lot of your own wood with a chainsaw, you've got an ample supply there of sawdust. If you are in an area where there's a sawmill, it's very likely that the sawmill will be quite happy to let you come and take their sawdust away. It's something that they actually have to manage and get rid of. So you'll be helping out your sawmill if you go and get sawdust from them. I've seen ash used. I've seen, is it lye or lime? Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Lye. So lye is the old school one that works really well.
Peat moss as well.
Peat moss. Well, that makes kind of sense.
Yeah. And another thing that if you've got a sawmill close around or whatever, you're off grid, you may not have power, you're probably using candles. Another good alternative for that sawdust is make yourself a little ball in something, drip a bunch of wax over it, and you've got yourself a good little fire starter.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's true. Some of the most effective store-bought fire starters I've had actually were a lot of sawdust with in resin.
Just a bit of wax to keep it together. I mean, like a way that you can do that if you're going off or whatever is a egg carton, right? Like we're talking people that are just going to go camping for a few days or whatever. Egg carton and keep all your dryer lint. Cram it in there, drip some candle wax on it. Yeah, and then you just cut it up and it's a little thing. It starts up quick. You know, so I mean, if you're already going to go get sawdust to do that, it wouldn't take much if you've got candles for light at night because you're like, I didn't have a lot of sun today, so you know, light this big nice candle as it's melting. Make a little ball somehow. Put some wax on it. It keeps it together. Something that you can help start your fire a little bit easier in case it smothers out on you without you knowing when you wake up.
Good tips. David's got a really good question here. Composting or incinerating toilets? And I thought of both.
Both
I would
rely on power.
The most composting will rely on power. They'll need some sort of fan. And incinerating toilets, I'm pretty sure all the modern ones will need some form of power for safety factor. All of the new appliances that burn some sort of gas need some sort of safety circuitry to keep it from blowing you up if you have yourself an operator malfunction. So I'm not sure which I would recommend. I'm still exploring the topic. I personally lean towards incinerating. And the reason I lean towards incinerating is it reduces the amount I have to handle in the end to a huge degree. And I'd rather handle ashes than composted poop because I've handled composted poop before. I rented a small renovated shed that was insulated for me, and it was tiny. It was 12 by 16, and the owners got really creative, and they put in a composting toilet that was designed for boats into this tiny little cabin, and it worked really well. The only downside is I had to, on the regular, like once a month, I had to empty the bucket and pull it out of the toilet and walk it out through the little tiny cabin and then go outside and dump it into the woods. And that was all that had to be done. It was, composted. So you just dump it into the woods and away you go. But it needed constant power to run the fan constantly. So that it was constantly being aerated. And so the moment there was a power outage, there was a bit of an odor coming in.
Yeah.
So maybe that was in how the piping was designed, the air draw. I don't know. But that's probably why I would go incinerating, because of that one experience. Should I let that one experience cloud my my future purchases? Maybe not. I might have to do some more research on that, but I would lean more towards incineration, and that's because I can bring in small tanks of propane up to 30 pounders without too much difficulty myself on ATV and trailer. But handling poop in that kind of volume, going up and down stairs, wintertime, summertime, rain, I'm not sure I would want to deal with that. Also, there's a fair amount of mud in my area right now, so I don't really want to deal with slippery and handling all that at the same time, right? So that would be my inclination, but I'm open to all suggestions. I haven't even entertained buying one yet, because I'm still working on a lot of the other essentials.
Fair enough.
Yeah, sounds good. Any other thoughts, ideas, questions from the panel?
So I put a bunch of questions in, but we never got to them. So I'll go to the one. What was the one or the best thing you brought with you that you didn't think you needed? Obviously, not the 5 can openers. But like, what was the one thing, right? Like, just the one thing you were like, well, I've got it and I'll bring it with me, and was a lifesaver? Or the one thing that you relied on being like, this is 100% needs to be in my preps, and you were like, this took up, 4 pounds and 20 cubic centimeters of a complete waste of time?
Headlamp.
Right there.
Nice.
Right there. Off the grid. You're going to have to turn off your gear at some point to maintain it. If you're working on your solar setup, if you're working on your electronics, if you're waking up in the middle of the night, your solar. So newsflash for those of you who aren't living on solar. Solar energy has to be stored somewhere, and that's a battery. And when you drain the battery, you have to recharge it. So one of the central tenets of running solar is you don't do any drawing on your batteries if you don't need it. So that means when you're sleeping, you turn everything off. Why? Because you're sleeping. You don't need it on, right? You don't need the radio on while you're sleeping, unless you're the kind of person who needs the radio to go to sleep, whatever. So that means when I go to bed, I turn absolutely all of my solar stuff off. This thing is rechargeable. This is a rechargeable headlamp, and it operates in both white light and red light. So in the middle of the night, when I just want to go put a log in the fire, I don't have to kill my night vision just to throw a log on. I can turn on this little red LED, and I can go down there and do all my business, right? The other thing about this that's great for me is I have an 800-yard walk from my truck to my cabin when I first get up there, because I don't leave my ATV by the roadside for everybody to see and covet. It's an old one, so not many are going to covet it, but I leave it deep in where my cabin is, which means I have to get to my bike or I have to get to the cabin to open it up. This little headlamp is what I use every time when there isn't moonlight. So that's the one item that now accompanies me everywhere. It's a silly little headlamp. There you go. Yeah.
So what's the one thing you were like, this was a giant waste? Was there anything? or just something that you were like, you know what, it would have been better off utilizing my space, time, even funds, right? Even $20 at some point, could go towards something. What was the one thing that you were like, you know what, this would be good, and you realized this was kind of a waste, or there would have been a better, it would have been a better effort to find something for a complete different thing?
That's a really good question. I really like that one. It's probably the one thing that I paid a lot of attention to before going up there. I thought, I really, really need this in my gear. And I used it once up there, and I cooked myself out of my own skin, and I never used it again. And that is a -35 rated sleeping bag. Yep. Laugh.
Yeah, those are not cheap.
They're not. They cost me a small fortune. I used it once. I just about died in there. I just overheated so badly. I cannot ever see the need to use that unless it's minus 20 or colder outside. And if I need to use that in my cabin, something has gone desperately wrong, and I shouldn't be sleeping in there. So there you have it.
But hopefully you didn't get rid of it and it's still up at the cabin just in case you need it.
It is still up at the cabin in case I need it. You bet. Because if for some reason something goes wrong, let's say I hurt myself.
Yeah.
And I can't go out there and fetch any firewood, and I have to let the cabin freeze while I'm in it. Well, the smartest thing I could ever do for myself then is to stay in that fart sack and stay as warm as I can until I can get some columns up and call somebody for help.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's the one item I haven't used yet.
I got okay. I got the okay from Pop that I can keep asking questions.
Right on.
All right. So this one has me thinking, right? Like we've all had those scenarios. So what was the one, or I guess both, right? What was your biggest misconception of going off grid? The one thing that you thought would be the worst and ended up being the best, and what you thought was the best and ended up being the worst.
Wow. So the one thing I thought was going to end up being the best, and the other one the worst. And it ended up being the contrary, right?
Yeah. Whichever one, just the biggest misconception. The one thing you dreaded and ended up being easy, and the one thing you thought was going to be easy and dread, like which way, right? Like the best and the worst.
I'll start with the one that I thought was going to be easy and turned out to be hard.
Yeah.
And that's camping in that zone. Camping. So, why camping? Because the particular area I am in, was at one point run through with a tiller, and it has left the ground with these ripples everywhere. So finding a spot to pitch any kind of tent was relatively easy. Finding one where you didn't have gullies to sleep in and accumulate water under you while you were sleeping if it rained outside, that was a little harder. So one of the first things I did was put away the little tent, and I picked myself up a hammock for my future visits up there. And then the next thing I did is I built a tempo shelter with a little platform for my girlfriend and I to be able to sleep in comfortably. And that included raising up something. So the shape of the ground, I was not ready for at all. Very uneven. Even when you have had your full dose of caffeine and you're fully rested, you can sometimes feel like a drunken sailor just walking around going, geez, I'm all over the place, right? So that was a continual challenge to deal with. The one thing that was a lot easier than I thought would be was finding things that I had no idea where they were. So to clarify, some of the people I dealt with up there were extremely helpful in telling me, oh, this is where you can find that item or this item. So out in the middle of nowhere where I live, you have to go somewhere first to find out where things are sometimes, because sometimes you can't describe over the phone what you're looking for. You got to go look. And you might get there and words still fail you and you still can't find the thing you're looking for. And now you're engaging with somebody you don't know and telling them about your problem so they can help you find a solution. And that's where I found the gold. I found some people were more than helpful and went out of their way to give me suggestions on where I could find the thing I was looking for, even though they couldn't give it to me or even had no idea where to find it. They knew at least somebody who could point me in the right direction. Yeah. So the one thing that I didn't think I would use as much as I did and ended up being really awesome was my people skills. And I'm not going to say I'm like the best people skill guy. I've worked a lot with people because, you know, in IT, people are usually the variable. The computer usually does what it's supposed to when it's supposed to until something breaks. Human beings are the ones that break the machines most of the time. So
they're the worst.
Oh yeah,
they're
I got used to
100%
working with
worst.
people. Oh yeah, well we are what we are. It's our nature.
Yeah.
So I got used to coming out of my own comfort zone and bubble to talk to people. And the reason that's a thing out there in the bush or up north is that there's a little bit of a stigma for the newcomer when you're up in the north. I'm always going to be a newcomer there for anybody who's lived there all their life. So even if I'm there 20 years, I will still be a newcomer there. Don't let that get to any of you if you're going to explore a new area or you're going off the grid like I did. Get to know people, man. That's how I learned that frost up there is a thing that we don't know how to deal with down here, down south. So I had to ask a couple of the locals, how do you go do this? How do you go do that? And they gave me all their tips, but I had to get out there and ask. So yeah, the people skills came in a lot handier than I thought and got me out of more jams than I can count.
Yeah, I don't want to go off grid anymore if I got to talk to people. I
can't blame you there.
Yeah. So, I mean, from the sounds of it, right, you enjoyed it, obviously. I've known you for a little while, and I mean, I am envious. But what's the one thing that did keep you going? Because, I mean, it doesn't take much to make a day where you've been away from people. You know, you're trying to grow a garden and realize half your crop's gone. You're hunting for whatever you can't find. Like, what kept you going on those days where you were just like, you know, I'm kind of tempted to take my monthly trip early and go to McDonald's.
Oh man, that's Pierre. That's probably the biggest challenge of all of the last year was not the practical aspect of living off the grid. It's the mental aspect. Living in isolation when everything goes wrong, because everything did go wrong. It did.
Oh, 100%.
I didn't get enough firewood.
You did it?
Oh, my vehicles broke down. I didn't get all the firewood I wanted stacked up in time for the winter. I didn't get half of what I wanted done. But you know what? It's the sense of satisfaction of getting up there, flipping on the homemade power grid, because that's what it is. It's my own homemade power grid. I flip it all on, and I'm able to operate and work from home and live. And not only am I able to do that, but I am well. I sleep well. I've got fresh air. I've got bird therapy all day long. I listen to them sing all day long. It's a beautiful thing. Now and then it's the ravens and the crows that come in and interrupt everything and let us know they're there. But
they also act as a good security system.
They definitely do. I know when there's people tromping around, when there's dogs running around, I'll know. But I also hear them down the road. I hear vehicles coming down the road. So the hardest part was the mental aspect. When things would go wrong, you end up digging deep. And that's character building, what can I say? So you either dig in there and you find what you've got to keep going. And a lot of times all I had to do is if I got frustrated is I would stop. And there were days where I couldn't get it back. I couldn't figure it out. So you know what I did? I slept on it.
Yeah.
These are little habits that, you know, my parents taught me when I was young, or wiser people than I taught me when I was young. And I started doing for myself. Sleep on it. Give your brain a break. You might get a better idea the next day. And often that did happen. I'd get a new idea the next day and, okay, I can creatively use this, and this to get around that problem. And away I go. Yeah.
And I mean, even not even sleeping on it, but like going away and just being like, you know what, I'm gonna go make myself a cup of coffee, sit down, and like take yourself away from that scenario. I've had it where like I'm, you know, like 45 minutes trying to connect something and everything. I get all frustrated, walk off, cursing, swearing, kicking the machine I'm working on. Go to the truck, take a sip of coffee, have a cigarette, take a sip of water, come back, and like, bam, what I've been fighting for 45 minutes is just like I'm like, why did I fight for 45? Right? Like, no, but not even like, you know, I'm trying to fix it. Like, I know what I got to do, but like, I can't get this hydraulic fitting to like, you know, the line to twist the right way to start the threads properly. 45 minutes, I'm covered in oil, right? And I'm like trying to do whatever, walk away, you know, have a smoke, have a sip of coffee or two, call someone, say, this is stupid, walk back. And it's like, why did I fight for 45 minutes? Like taking yourself away from that, right? It's crazy how like, just when it starts going, you start getting frustrated, and then you just start going crazy. And it's just like, you know, take a step back, like get somewhere where you know what to do, right? You're trying to take this tree down, you're doing whatever off-grid. It's just like you're somewhere where you're like, okay, I'm not going to miss a step and blow myself up, right? Like if you're doing your electrical for your solar panels, right? You don't want to be somewhere where you don't remember which wire is what, right? And fry your whole system, right?
That's right.
But it's just like something's not working. Okay, label everything, do whatever, come back to it later. And then normally you come back with a fresh set of eyes. You might just be fatigued because you've been trying it for so long and you're staring and like you can't see the problem. And yeah, that can make a world of difference.
The mental game was tremendous. Because it would have been really easy at any point in those challenges to go, that's it, I give up. I'm heading back to the city.
Just, grab your stuff, walk back to the truck, and like you're out of there.
Yeah, and I could have pulled pin at any point and done that. And I even considered it once or twice. Like when all my machinery broke down and then my truck broke down.
Oh,
that's when I was probably at my lowest.
But I mean, how are you going to get out of there if everything's broken? So I mean, you had to stay, right?
I was in a real jam there. So, or here's another one. Same idea. With my truck broken in the shop, a friend of mine came and rescued me. He let me borrow his truck. Remember what I said about not being afraid to talk to people? Yeah, this was one of those where not being afraid to talk to somebody. All of a sudden, he drops this in my lap and says, hey, why don't you borrow my truck until you get yours back? So then he says, just one catch, though. You need to do an oil change. I'm thinking, that's great, man. I'll do your oil change. No problem, man. I got this.
Yep.
So it's a diesel. Okay, it's my first oil change on a diesel. No problem. We're talking much larger volume of oil. Okay, not a big deal. So I go and buy the oil. I get the filter and, get myself all set up. I should have known. I start taking the plug out and I'm thinking, man, I'm having to reef awfully hard to take out this oil plug. I've never had this before. I've always been able to take out my oil plug with a single pull of the socket or the wrench, whoop, and off it pops. And then I just take it up by hand and whoop, out comes the oil and there goes my sound effects. But anyway, in this one, I literally had the socket on the oil nut and I was lifting myself off the ground to loosen the bolt, and it still wouldn't loosen. I should have known. I was right going to get into trouble right then and there. I should have stopped taking that plug off, and I should have not drained that oil. But I did. I got the plug off. I drained the oil, and then I tried to remove the oil filter. And I did not have the appropriate sized wrench for this oil filter. So I thought, no problem. I'll use the old school barbarian trick. I'll puncture it with my screwdriver and give it the old wrench. 100%. Right. Yeah. Done it hundreds of times. So I go ahead and do that. And the thing reefs right through the filter and it's just pissing oil all over the place. And I'm going, geez, I've never had that happen before. King Kong must have put on this oil filter. Okay. Yeah. So now I start getting creative. Man, you know what I ended up having to do to get that off? I tried every trick. I used the old do-rag tied up in a knot and then leverage with a socket wrench. Nope. All that did was squeeze the filter together into a mangled mess. I ended up harvesting two hose clamps. Two hose clamps I had sitting around back at the cabin. I came back with the hose clamps, tied them together so they made a big loop. And then I clamped that around the oil filter. And then I used the do-rag around the nubs that were hanging off of those hose clamps, and that gave me enough traction. No, it was a chain. The rag didn't work. I ended up using a chain, and the chain links were into those nubs. Yeah, so this took me about an hour and a half just to take off that filter.
And for like a 10-minute job.
For a 10-minute job, and by the end, I was just completely drenched in oil. My gloves had punctured through. I was bleeding from the knuckles. I was just a mess. I'd wrecked a hat and a shirt. But you know what? I got her done. But for a moment there, I thought, crap, who am I going to call? What am I going to do here? I can't even make a phone call.
Who are you going to call? Ghostbusters is not going to help you with that one, buddy.
That's right. So, yeah.
And the problem being, of course, your vehicle doesn't work. Now you've got that one, no oil in it. No oil filter. It's not like you can drive somewhere and pay somebody to do it for you.
Nope, I have to finish the job. There is no other way. So I ended up tackling the problem 4 or 5 different times until I finally got it off. And then I'm sure I did like the loudest woo. I'm sure everybody heard me at 10 kilometers away because I was just ecstatic, elated. Man, yeah, that's quite the adventure.
So, what did you do for food up there? Did you plan out a garden? Did you do some hunting? Did you come up with, I have a stockpile of food. I'm going off grid. I'm going to take all my canned stuff. I'm going to make 15 trips and have all my cans sorted out for preps. Like, did you plan for gardens, or was it, I want to do the garden, but I got to make sure I don't freeze in the winter. Like, what was your plan going in for food?
It's an excellent question because food is the third major item on the list, right? Yeah. So I was fortunate enough that in the year leading up to me going up there, I already had some stores of food and mostly dry stocks. So I had 32 pounds of flour. I had, I think, 5 pounds of chickpeas. I had, I think, 20 pounds of rice, about 10 pounds of oats, both quick oats and regular oats. So a lot of the, Denny mentioned, am I going to have a smokehouse built? Oh, I dream of an outdoor kitchen, Denny. I dream of an outdoor kitchen. I'm talking like a smoker, a grill, a wood-fired oven, the works.
We piqued his interest on Friday night.
Oh,
when he
yes.
was over for supper. He was like, "Oh, what do you got?" And then I showed him everything else we had, and he was like, "Oh yeah, we piqued the interest." Don't worry.
Yeah, Pierre showed me a few goodies, and it just dovetails perfectly into my dream of an outdoor kitchen. But on the food side, I used a lot of my dry goods at first, and I also had a considerable amount of cans, a lot of canned goods that I'd accumulated. So that all came up with me right away, and I used it quite a lot, especially as the price of food skyrocketed. So if you think food has gotten expensive around the cities, up north and in the farther to reach areas, man, it is eye-bleedingly expensive. And so I would go to the store and spend $40 to $50, and all I did was pick up a few condiments and maybe a little bit of milk to have tea with. And I don't have much pocket change left from that. So I remember thinking, well, geez, I'd better start relying on the food stocks that I do have. And so I ate a lot of canned goods. Now, I tried gardening at first, and then I realized preparing and working in the dense, compact clay soil that we have, very, very difficult to grow in there in the first season. So thanks, Pat. Thanks for subbing. So in the first season, I decided, okay, I've got to prioritize. I have to prioritize. I can't do everything. So I decided to delay my plans for gardening. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with raised beds. And then I'm going to have to focus on bringing in a whole lot of dirt to put in there. And over the longer term, I can do some remedial work to bring some of that soil back so that we can start using it natively. The fact that we have a high water table should be really awesome for growing stuff. But hugelkultur is something that works in that kind of zone as well. But that all takes time. None of that's instant, right? So I chose to work a lot with my preps. I did do a little bit of hunting. There's a tremendous amount of grouse there. And for anybody who is an aspiring hunter, I'm just telling you right now, get yourself a 22 and get used to going for small game. You will have far more success putting something on your table to eat, finding small game, than any of the large game or medium game out there. So grouse really did it for me up there, and the fishing is phenomenal. So there was always some good wild protein to catch.
So did you pre-plan on doing any kind of smoking, processing, or whatever of the meat, like summer wise, right? Like hey, it's fishing season. I can catch a bunch. Were you able to, plan accordingly to be able to say salmon, pike? I'm not a fisher. Those are the only two I hear about, right? But be able to cure some of it for storage that you can have those proteins when, February hits and it's -40 out. There's a storm. You're hungry, but you don't want to go look for grouse, squirrel, whatever. Were you able to, or is that in the future plans at least?
That's in the future plans, and I'm doing a lot of research on that. So I'm kind of caught between the high-tech approach and the old school approach, as always. Old school, sun curing. Sun curing was a thing. We used to have a lot of knowledge on sun curing. And so I bought a few books on preservation of meat in the old-fashioned way. Smoking is definitely another one that is really, really good. For any of you who are out there new to preservation, smoke actually kills bacteria. So if you're kind of dirty and smelly, just go and hang out over a fire. Put your pits and your butt over that fire. The smoke will actually kill the bacteria on your body. It does the same thing to the meat. It does the same thing.
If that doesn't work, it'll burn it off.
That's right.
Right, but I mean, like I've seen many of them, or not many or whatever, but like videos, shows, whatever, where they build grab some sticks, make a little teepee, throw some brush around it, get those nice coals, but they've got 10 pounds of salmon in there, and they smoke it. And they forget about it. They're like, no, let's go catch fresh stuff for tonight. Right? This was this is all the stuff we processed in the morning. Let's get that curing overnight and everything. You want to eat tonight, you go catch something else because the thing's full and we got nothing left on the table. Right? They're thinking long term, like we're talking probably a lot more north, like Alaska, whatever, where their winters and everything are crazy, or at least crazier than us. Right? So it's like, I got a feeling that might be your best bet. When we come up there, maybe that'll be in the plans after the hunting.
It's definitely in the works because I know how phenomenal the fishing is up there. And one thing that concerns me is having a really, really great fishing harvest. And then I come home and now I got to process all that meat and preserve it. Yeah. If I only catch 2 or 3 fish and bring that home, guess what? I'm going to eat it all that night and I'm going to have a big fat belly and it's going to be great. But whenever you're catching more than just what you're going to eat, then the preservation comes into play. So part of this year's focus is going to be on having sun drying racks and building some sort of old school smoker. What design yet, which approach I'm going to take, I don't know. I do have a charcoal grill up there, so I can do old school charcoal smoking as well. And I have a propane barbecue too, naturally. But I've got to work on being able to preserve a larger volume of meat, especially if I get a moose tag this year. That's going to be a big, big, big concern, is how to preserve that meat in a way that it could store long periods of time. So that's a lot of jerky, right?
If you can't store it, you let me know, buddy. I will drive up and gladly bring it back on home. Right?
Yep. So we'll be talking about meat preservation at some point. That's probably worth an entire episode on its own.
But we have our dehydrator. We've got our smoker. We're starting to dabble in it. Haven't done anything crazy, but it's definitely a thing because you can make some wicked sausages for yourself or jerky.
I'll be looking into everything. I'll be looking into the power requirements of those fancy new dehydrators that are out there. So for anybody who's listening in and hasn't heard our previous episodes, my battery bank system is small. And that's because I didn't pay much money for the cabin, and I was starting to not see the value in paying more than half of the cabin in solar gear. So that's why I reeled myself back from having the mythical 5 days worth of power. And that's what they say when you're designing for solar, by the way. If you're listening in, you're supposed to design your battery capacity for 5 days worth of storms without sun.
I don't know how much 5 days of TikTok feed I in, right? Right?
Well, and that's actually the biggest point here. Because I'm living off the grid, I assume that at any point in time I will have no electricity.
Yep.
So that means that I don't have to size my batteries for 5 days. I just have to size them for as long as enough as is practical for the money I'm willing to spend. Yep. And then I have my generator that I can run and charge my battery setup and continue to run all my workloads uninterrupted. So if I notice my batteries are really down and, oh, geez, I'm going to have to go fire up the generator, I don't have to turn anything off anymore. I just go and connect the generator and run it. Right. So I chose that balance.
Yeah, right. And I mean, there needs to be, I mean, I would think so at least, right? There needs to be that time where it's just like, you know, I need a break from doing the off-grid thing. Not saying that you're going to sit there and like stream Netflix all day or whatever, but just like, you know, did you have those days where it's just like you didn't feel like going to do anything, where it's just like, no, I just want to sit down and whether it be read a book or, yeah, I know you're into reloading. Was it just a day where you were just like, nah, you know what? I want to make like 100, 200 rounds. I don't need them right this second, but it's just like you just want to disconnect from like that off grid and kind of go back to something, you know, one of your other side gigs or passions. You know what? I haven't sat down and read a book in a month, and it's kind of shitty out today, so it's like I'm just gonna take that time to, like, you know, that day for myself, where I'm gonna drink 2-3 teas and I'm gonna read a book, I'm gonna reload, I'm gonna do this, you know, one of those things that would maybe require power but not so much require the, you know, the think ahead. Or, you know, I need to think, if what can I do today to make my life easier in 2 weeks.
I love it. And yeah, I considered a huge part of that in my staying up there, because there were days where, like it or not, the weather was imposing its will on me. Mm-hmm. Heavy rain, not getting much built because you're trudging around, slipping around everywhere. So it's not safe to actually run around with, you know, a big load in your hands or try to nail big structures together with power tools or even hand tools when it's pouring rain. So, or when it was -40 and, you know, gale force winds outside. That's not fit for human beings to go out there and just hang out. So when I did go out there, it was only out of necessity, you know, to go get some fire starter or some firewood. Hopefully I was smart enough that I saw the weather system coming in the weather forecast or on the horizon or through wind direction. Yeah. And I would know, okay, I better fill up on wood first. But there were many days when Mother Nature imposed her will on me and said, no, all those plants you thought you had today, just scrub them. And so, yeah, there's a few things that I have up there for those times. I got a lot of books, a ton of books. So if the power does start to wane and I don't feel like running outside to run the generator just so I can have internet, you know what? I just turn off Starlink and I wait until tomorrow, because it's probably going to charge up tomorrow, and that's it. And then I pull up the book. I even bought some harmonicas, because that's something that I want to get into, is get back into music. And I don't feel like having an extremely expensive instrument that I have to carry in a big case. The idea that I can carry an instrument in my back pocket or in my pocket, I thought that was pretty cool. So I picked up a couple of those to keep myself busy. And one of my favorite pastimes that doesn't cost me anything, because when I reload, I'm using components and that costs money in the end. Yeah, I love to sharpen knives when I'm just sitting around. So I'll sharpen my knives. I'll clean my wrenches, my sockets, and you know, a firearm is never a bad thing to give it a clean, right? So there's always something to do in there when the weather is bad and you're off the grid. If not, just working on your own mental game, you know, so relaxing.
Did you ever have those days that weren't associated with crappy weather outside, but just like, I need a day? Oh, yeah. Where you did one of those things, right? It was sharpen a knife, read a book, reload, clean a gun, right? Yep. Did you? Because I'm sure I know you probably hesitated taking that day off, because you were like, well, what if tomorrow's crappy? Right now I'm 2 days behind. Was it a challenge to get in that right mindset where it's like, it's okay to take a day off? It's not okay to take a week. But, you know, like, hey, I got 4 or 5 days of solid stuff done. got to where I wanted, I just want a day for myself, because I mean the hustle and bustle can just be overwhelming, where I'm like, the last thing you want is a burnout where you're out of the game for a week.
You bet, Pierre. This is another part of that mental game I was talking about that was probably the bigger challenge, being up there, especially if you're a little bit of a go-getter or a bit of an A-type, just get her done.
Yeah.
And I was used to being that guy, they call me when the hard work needs to get done. And so I'm going to go in, and I had that attitude, that drive. I'm going to go and get her done because it's all on me.
Yeah.
And that can be really hard on you if you have high expectations of yourself. And so that happened more than a few times. And it's usually when I pushed myself so hard up until that point that my body starts to say, hey, you know what? It's time to stop.
You need to chill out. Yeah.
You need to chill out. Even though it's sunny outside, there's no wind, it's a beautiful day, you're going to take the morning to just drink tea, maybe surf around, catch up to the news, and relax.
Yeah.
And then eventually by the, mid-afternoon, or maybe even earlier, sometimes by 11 o'clock, I'm out of that, and bam, I've got my energy and my juice back, and it's time to get back at it. But managing the mental game is really big in wilderness or off-grid scenarios, because again, everything is longer, everything's harder, and isolation has driven people insane. People have seen woodsmen running out of the woods, batshit mad, because they spent way too much time in there without social contact. It has happened, and it will happen again. So the best thing to do is to manage that mental game. And so, I gave myself those breaks. I always felt guilty, the next day. I always felt guilty. It's like, oh man, I lost, 3 or 4 hours there. It was great weather, and now it's raining again.
Or it's extra hot today, right? It was 15 yesterday, and it's 25 today, and it was like, I would have preferred doing all this in 15 weather and taking the day, right? And it's just one of those things. But I'm like, you got to keep your sanity, in my opinion, right? Like,
you do.
We all have those days. Like, we've all woken up and just been like, I'm using a sick day today. Fuck it, right?
Yep. There were days where my biggest accomplishment was, I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna go to the lake for a bath. And that's a glorious feeling. If you've never done it, friends, go and have a bath in a lake.
When you haven't had one for 2 weeks.
Well, exactly. It's absolutely glorious. Getting some sun shining on those bits feels really good too.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I don't think you would deter anybody from ever having the experience you had of having the opportunity to go off grid. But what would you say to a person that may not have been as prepared as you, but decides that they want to take the challenge of going off grid somewhere? Let's say they, not including like the land or the rental fee of a cabin. They already got the wood stove in, they've got power, maybe not the perfect setup, but enough to get them by, right? Like, so where you're standing right now, what would you tell someone would be a good potential budget to plan for? Or, hey, these are your key things. You want to make sure you have this, because I'm sure there are some people out there that, may have more money than they care to have, or are willing to take a gamble where the opportunity to, hey, do you want to go off grid for even 6 months? Okay, well, like you said, you had, you had some canned stuff stored away. So what would be a semi sort of budget on, let's say it's a cabin. The necessity of hand tools are there. They don't have to bring many of those things, but they gotta, budget to maintain the axes, maintain this. They gotta bring their own food. Do the same as you for water, right? They may have to drive a little bit or whatever. What would you say maybe ballpark budget?
Well, breaking down the costs of building a small cabin, the two big expenses, probably in the same order of magnitude as your timber, are going to be the roof, What was the other one? It was really clear in my mind too.
Heat.
Probably your chimney and your stove.
Yeah,
Your roof and your climate control are your biggest expenses, and your insulation. And really, the factor of the insulation factor is pretty big. It's quite costly, surprisingly costly. So, that being said, a lot of it is dependent on the size of what you're building. So if you're building something reasonable, like say my cabin, 16 by 12 with a loft, you're probably looking at, with the chimney and a wood stove, not all new. Okay, you don't have to do all this brand new. The chimney should be new. Your roof should be new. Those are things I wouldn't skimp on. The wood stove, you can probably get away with getting a used one. The insulation, you could probably go used, but would you really want to? So I would go new on that. You're probably not getting away for much less than 15 grand to build it. And you're going to have to do all of that yourself to keep the costs down. If you're paying anybody to do any of this, take that figure and double it. The usual figure for construction is half materials and half labor, right? So I would not have been able to afford it if I was paying somebody else to do it, plain and simple. So I took it all on myself to do it. And the risk there is, if you screw it up, you got to pay out of pocket to fix your own problems, and you still have to fix your problems. So there's a cost to everything. Now, the larger you go, and this is something I'm factoring into my next cabin, because this is my first cabin. Before this, I had a 40-foot cottager trailer off the grid. So I'm moving up in the world, because that 40-foot cottager trailer had paper thin insulation, and it was terrible to keep warm in there. So it's really a step up. Now I can heat this with a candle. So the larger the space you build off the grid, the more you have to heat it. And that means you have more wood to store, and you have to do more frequent runs to get firewood. So most of your day-to-day through the winter is going to be managing firewood. And the smaller your space, the more efficient your wood stove, the less you have to worry about that, and the more the heat retains if it's well insulated. So those are all factors in how much it's going to cost you to build. Right? If you build with 2x4 walls, basically something like an ice fishing shack, you can probably heat that with a tiny little tent stove. But would you want to live in there for a long period of time? Right? I can tell that living in a 16 by 12 with everything you need to live when you're fully self-sufficient and used to living in larger homes, it's a challenge, because there's not enough space for all your stuff. Yep. So size is important. My next cabin will probably be a 16 to 24, 16 by 24, or maybe even 24 by 24. But again, the complexity of the build increases, the cost increases. Preparing a foundation for a larger cabin becomes a bigger job, because you have to support your spans every 8 feet.
And I mean, now your wood supply needs to double.
That's right. And
even if it's well insulated.
Oh yeah,
you do. Right? Like, just to sustain that. Like, yeah. So everything, right? The bigger, the more.
That's right. That's right. And let me say this, because this is my first time I'm building a shed right now, and I decided to go ahead and add windows in all my wisdom. I didn't consider the major impact that was going to have on my wood supply. Adding a door, adding a window, just look into how to properly frame one, and you will see that you require a lot more timber to deal with any doors or any windows. So build that into your calcs. That all adds to the budget. How fancy do you like it? Does it have to be showroom finish so they can put it up? And man, I like it rustic looking. So I don't have to have everything finished to the nines. So all of that adds up to the cost. And again, I have a 100% dry cabin. That keeps the cost low. The moment you want to add water in there, man, you just adding a lot more. So I'd say your ballpark beginning for something about what I have, I'd say, 16 to 20 thou, and then you've got to power it up.
Yeah. So last question. Unfortunately, Brett had to leave. He's got to work tomorrow or whatever. So I'll just mention his question. What is the one thing you wish you were better prepared for?
Mechanical failures. I have 2 ATVs. They were both down for a while. So, and that really, really, really slowed me down. When my truck went down, it really slowed me down. The things that we use every day without thinking are the ones that we miss the most when they go. Yeah. And that's what it was for me, is that truck. And it was a dumb little thing, just a stupid little vehicle speed sensor, and not knocking me out of commission for a couple of weeks because they had to diagnose it. And that's what took a long time, is the diagnostic. Yeah. And that's the same with your small motors, right? Pierre, I'm sure you've seen this in your line of work. You go out there, half the battle is figuring out, okay, what do I have to replace or fix? Because it was running perfectly before, right? Yeah. So
most of the time when it happens to me, it's because someone did something they weren't supposed to.
Yep.
Right. Like the people that rent it or whatever. But like, yeah, it's just like, having that baseline of, right. So like, I got a feeling it'd be if I had the same scenario as you a year ago, right? Like I went off grid. I guarantee you that would not be my failure, but I guarantee you it's something that you would probably just be like, piece of cake. Yeah. Right. Like, so yeah.
Yeah, I'd say if there's one skill set, Pierre, that I think you would do very well with off the grid, is your ability to fix anything with a motor. One of my friends up there is a former licensed mechanic. Another one of those invaluable friends for me up there. He gave me advice that just rescued me so many times. So if I had to start my life over again with pure self-sufficiency in mind,
trades, something in the trades, be a plumber, be an electrician, be a framer. They all intertwine in how you think, and they all know some framer wants plumbing done. So if you're the plumber, you can learn something, right? They all intertwine. Mechanics, same thing, right? Like, the trades, it's a dying trade, unfortunately, because a lot of people don't want to do it because they think it's below people. But I'm like, doesn't matter how it is, man. Toilets are going to get backed up. Your lights won't work. Houses are going to need to be built or fixed. Trades is the way to go, in my opinion.
It truly is. It truly is. And there's a trade out there for every kind of person. Are you really good at math? Maybe you want to get into electricity or plumbing because there's some math involved there, right? 100%. Framing, you're going to have to work with fractional math if you're framing, right? Yeah. So if you have a really hard time with that, you might want to take a step back and think about your career. But oh man, there's so many good trades out there. And the beautiful thing is, in the bush, an IT guy is not all that useful until he shows that he has other skills.
Right? Until Sterling is there, and then he's the guy, right?
Well, what's funny is that when people find out that I have a certain skill set in that side, they'll start telling me about their machine or their phone or their this or that. And I've done this before out in the boondocks away from the large cities. And the thing is computer work just doesn't have the same value out there as it has in the city, unfortunately.
No.
A good competent tech should be able to bring in 120 an hour without a problem, up to 150 an hour in any big city. Up there, if you tell somebody that you'll fix their computer for 150 an hour, they'll tell you to go pound sand, and then they'll find Billy Bob, the kid down the street, to do the job for them.
Yeah,
that's the reality of the bush. So there are certain skills that are more practical than others up there. Mine happens to be tracking. I happen to track well. So if I was in a hunting party up there, they'd find that I'm useful. But otherwise, I've had to learn a lot from the ground up, and so I've relied a lot on the people there, especially the tradespeople and the mechanics. They've been real godsends to me. So if you're wondering, what should I do for prepping? Get a good trade. Having a good trade and being able to bring in your own income and being self-sufficient is a good prep. It's probably the number one prep.
So when we all come up and later on in the fall there, we'll bring some tools up and we'll give you a little crash course on everything you got.
Sounds good. I have a ton to learn about welding and how to do that off the grid, and maybe some learning to do about welder generators. And that would be cool too.
We'll get it done. Me and Mel will hook you up because we both do it. She's better at welding than I am. She showed me how to weld. So both of us there, buddy, we'll show you how to fix almost anything.
I did really well on my first ticket because I started my ticket a long time ago, and I did A+ on my welding 101. So I can weld stick, but that's all I learned.
I got one of those.
So one last quick question off of the live chat, if we can,
by all means,
kind of be a little quick about it. We've been at it for 2 hours and 10 minutes, and we'll kind of wrap it up there. And that's the question from Rockin' Ryan. And it's, what do you have set up if a family arrived at your doorstep in the dead of winter in need of help?
12 gauge.
That's a great question. And it's my 12 by 12 Cabela's Alaknak tent with full vestibule. That can be set up in about an hour. And they are designed to work in snow too. So with a shovel and a little bit of clearing work and any one of my axes or hammers or sledges, we can pound the pickets in, we can get that up and running, and we can have heat in there, and they've got at least shelter. And I know if they're coming up in the dead of winter and I got a warm cabin, we can all pile in there and stay nice and warm and cozy. And at the very least, we will never freeze. So there's that. The other thing is I also know how to make improvised shelters. So if you have a few tools around and you know how to make a fire outside, any family can kind of keep themselves warm in the bush, given a few survival items on them. So I won't break out into a full lesson on fire making and shelter making, as there's about a million different ways to make a shelter and fire. So that's a worthy subject unto itself. We could delve into at some point. But yeah, the expedition tent is my current go-to for that. And that's what the shed is incidentally also going to be for, so that I have other options. A standing roof is really great when you have 40 centimeters worth of snow dumped in 24 hours, and a little less challenging to deal with than in a tent. So that's the other reason I wanted that shed. And currently I have the foundation built and one wall up. The other wall is partially built, and it's going to go up soon enough, as soon as the thaw finishes up there. So that's what I got for any visitors or anybody on the run.
All right. Well, with that said, I think we'll move into the podcast challenge. So I don't know if this is, I kind of struggled to come up with one, but I thought scout out an area that you think might be good for an off-grid cabin.
Nice.
And then do the things like Frugal said, where, you know, learn the vegetation, see if you can figure out what the water table is. Roads in and out, do they get eroded with the thaw or the freeze, and all those things, and see how you did. You know, keep an eye on it for the next few months, and, you know, over the next 4 seasons. And did you pick a good spot that's, you know, going to have 10 inches of water in the spring?
Yep. Not too good for a tent if you got 10 inches of water on the ground, right?
Right.
You know.
Yeah. But if you're going to go build a cabin and you build it 3 feet off the ground, you're still good. You could just fish off the front porch.
Pretty well, yeah. So for upcoming events, the only thing I've got is we brought it up several times, the annual Preppers Meet in Desborough, Ontario, July 6th to 9th of 2023. Anybody's interested, get your tickets. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make it this year, but I'm going to try. I'll do my quick weather blurb. So as I mentioned last week, the change in the jet stream caused by moving from the La Nina to the El Nino is going to cause colder air to blast into the southern U.S. That's happened. This clash with the warm, moist air from the Gulf could spark off severe storms. That has happened. We've seen several storms pop up in the last few days, especially in the Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi area. Believe it or not, Florida had a tornado in Palm Beach Gardens. That is very rare for Florida to get a tornado outside of usually when they also have a hurricane. This weather pattern should hold for a few more days, and then things may start to calm themselves down a little bit. Right now, there's a large low pressure system that's stalled over the Great Lakes, and it is dumping heavy rain throughout eastern Ontario, Quebec, and the eastern seaboard of the U.S. Brad sent us a group message saying it was pouring where he lives, and he's in eastern Ontario.
Well, buddy, it's coming down.
Yeah.
He's not far from me, and it's coming down.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yep.
If this storm had formed in the winter months, it would have been a serious nor'easter. That would have for sure been a blizzard. It was a very deep low pressure system, and there is a crap ton of moisture in it. As Pierre was saying, it's raining like crazy. So,
yep.
Talking about snow, areas in Wisconsin and the very northern parts of Michigan, up near a small town of Ironwood, they're on the backside of the low. So anybody that doesn't know, low pressure systems rotate in a counterclockwise direction. So it's pulling the cold air as it wraps around and comes back down. It's pulling the cold air down. So they're on the backside of the low pressure, and they could get a foot plus of snow, even 1st of May. So it's not uncommon, but it's not something you really want to have to worry about. The only other thing I want to quickly mention is it's also that time of year where there's the potential for forest fires.
Yep.
The ground's starting to dry. There's still a lot of leaves, pine needles, that kind of stuff there. They're great for having a fire, but not if you've got a forest fire. So if you're in an area that there's the potential there for the forest fire, have your bug out bag ready and, do what you can to mitigate the threat. So clean up those leaves, those pine needles, get rid of the dead wood, that kind of stuff. So,
yep.
And Pierre, you've got a deal of the week for us?
Yeah. So getting into the nice weather and everything, Princess Auto has a 2-gallon spot sprayer pump manual, $12.22. I know I'm buying a few with gardening season coming up, bug mitigation, whatever you want to do around your house. May not be bad to go buy a few of those, maybe keep one stored away in case it fails, but that's a pretty good deal, and I know we'll be getting a few of them. So that's our deal of the week.
All right, thank you. Any shout-outs? Anybody got any shout-outs?
Just quick thanks again to Frugal Gunny for the wealth of knowledge of his experience and everything, sharing it with people and giving his 2 cents. Much appreciated.
Anytime.
Always more than 2 cents. I think it was closer to $5 this time, but that was
it's probably more like that. Yeah.
yeah. And also to the people out there in the live chat, it was pretty active tonight. A lot of good chatter back and forth. That's what we like to see. People exchanging ideas, and it doesn't have to be totally on the topic we're on. If it's something that somebody needs a question on or whatever, nice to see the people jumping in there. So with that, I'm going to bring episode 203 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast to an end. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Podbeam, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please help us out and submit a review. It helps other people find us.
We record these shows live on Facebook and YouTube. If you want an early peek at the shows, please subscribe to the YouTube channel Canadian Prepper Podcast and click the notifications tab. That gives you alerts when we're going live. You can contact me at Facebook, on Instagram, even on YouTube, and I'm even in the Discord.
You can get in touch with me. I will say me, but it'll be Mel. Off the Wall Customizing, we're pretty much on all the social medias, or Off the Wall Customizing at Gmail. The Discord, send me a personal message. I don't check it. I didn't check it for a few days, and I'm completely lost and too many notifications. Or you can find me on Monday nights on the used tubes on the other CBP, where you may find out why I critique the government and will end up in a lot of trouble one day.
Please check out Rapid Survival at rapidsurvival.com. You can get Eric there because he doesn't want to show up here on the live chat while buying some prepper gear. If you want to reach me, you can email me at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca, or I am also frequently on the Discord. So thanks for joining us tonight. Until next time, be prepared, stay safe,
and keep learning.